Okay, to get started, you're going to go into Illustrator and open a new file. Mine is going to be 5 inches by 5 inches. I'm using print, but because this is a vector, you don't have to actually do it in this exact dimension. But the reason I'm doing it this way is it's going to make it really easy. If I do it in a square with even numbers, it makes it easy for me to do a grid. Okay, so just go ahead and create. And I'm doing RGB because ultimately, if I do want to print this on, for instance, my high resolution Epson printer, those are going to be RGB printers that use RGB color profile, unlike a lot of CMYK. So I'm also going to leave it at 300 ppi, but again, because this is a vector, it's always going to be something you can scale later. Okay, so what I want you to do before you get started is I want you to go up here to Illustrator. On a Windows computer, it's going to be under Edit, and then you go into Preferences. But on a Mac, it's go to Illustrator, go to Settings, and then we're going to go to Guides and Grid. We're going to use our grid to get set up first because this is all going to be grid-based. If you don't do it grid-based, if you want to follow this demo, then you're probably going to have some significant problems with alignment. Okay, so what's important is I want to do a grid line. I'm going to do mine every ½ inch with subdivisions of 12. And then next thing you need to do is go ahead and go to View, go to Show Grid, and then you get every ½ inch or the heavier gray lines, and I'll zoom in to show you what I'm talking about, right? And then we've got 12 in between. Okay, now the other thing too that I'm going to do is I want to draw some guides just to find center point so I don't get too confused by looking at all these grid lines. To do that, I'm going to enable my rulers, so that's Command R on a Mac or Control R on Windows, and you'll get the rulers showing up. And because we set our stuff up in inches, then it's going to show our rulers in inches. But if ever you need to change your units of measure, you can always right click here and up in the ruler area, and then you can change it to whatever you want. Okay, so I'm going to drag out a guideline, and you'll notice that it's not really snapping. Okay, I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to tell you to go up here to View, scroll down, and you're going to find Snap, and you're going to say Snap to Grid. So make sure that you turn that on, and whenever you do it, just remember it'll have a check mark next to it to show that it's enabled. So now that we've got Snap turned on, if I pull this guide out, you can see that it just sort of pops into place. Same is going to be true for the top. I'm going to drag one down. I've got my center mark, and now it's just easy for me to find center later on. Okay. Now the other thing too that I'm going to tell you to do is we're going to kind of cruise up here in this corner, and we're going to start by drawing our circle. I'm going to go over here to my tool panel, and by the way, let's just go ahead and we're going to go to Window, and we're going to go to Workspace, and I'm going to say Reset Essentials so that what I see is also what you see, okay? And I'm not using Classic Essentials, so and then the 2024 version, and you may be watching this at a later year, but this is the 2024 version. If you go down to Window and then you go to Workspace, you're going to see that there's Essentials and Essentials Classic. There's some things that are, if you're used to using Illustrator from before, that you might find that it's hard to discover where things are. You can always go to Essentials Classic. And then there's some other things too, but we're going to just stick with Essentials for now. All right, so I'm going to go over here to my tool panel, and I'm going to choose my ellipse tool. If it's not already chosen, that's what you need to do. You might have like a line or rectangle or something chosen. So ellipse tool. And I'm going to zoom in this top corner. And what I'm going to do is, because this is every ½ inch, I'm going to use the center of the heavier lines so that my full circle is going to be an entire inch in diameter. In diameter. So I'm going to put, because I have Snap turned on, I'm going to put my cursor in the center. And even if I'm kind of close to the center, like right now, you'll notice, let me zoom in a lot more. I'm not on the center, but if I click here and I start to draw, you'll see that it's still trying to find that corner right there, okay? Now I'm going to undo what I just did. So, but you're going to find the center point, and you're going to hold down. First of all, click and hold, and then you're going to hold down Option and Shift. And what that does is Option will draw it from the center, where Shift will constrain it. And because I've got Snap on, and I've got Snap to Grid, and I've got my grid enabled, then it will go to my grid units of measure. That's why the units of measure are important if what you're doing actually matters in terms of these subdivisions and stuff. Okay. Now, the important thing is you're going to let off of your mouse first, and then you're going to let up off the keys. If you do it the other way around, it's going to do something a little bit wonky. In fact, let me just show you. If I click and hold, and then I hold Option and Shift, and I let up off the Shift and Option keys first, you see it does something like this. What Illustrator natively wants to do is it natively wants to draw using the top left registration point for the circle, as if this were a square. So if you can imagine that this was a square, it's looking at this as the top left registration point. Okay, so if I hold down my Shift and Option again, it'll draw it from the center, and it will constrain it to a perfect circle. Okay, so now the other thing too that I want to point out is that I drew my circle, but if I click off of it, which I'm not going to do, well, just click off of it. I'm going to grab my arrow selection tool, my black arrow tool, and it looks like I don't have a circle anymore. Well, I do if I go and I drag to select it. I do, but the problem is that I didn't give it a stroke. So over here in the left, I'm going to give it a stroke. I'll give it a black stroke. And before I do anything else, I'm going to make sure to go to Properties, and I want to turn this down because I'm going to duplicate this circle, and I want the stroke to have the right size from the beginning. So I'm going to go ahead and do this at 0.25. I want it to be a nice and thin stroke, so it doesn't really get in the way. It could even be smaller, but that's good enough for me for right now. I just need to be able to see it. Okay, now I'm going to zoom out, and I'm on a computer with a trackpad, so I could just do a pinch and zoom, but if you're not, you can use the magnifying glass tool, and the default is to zoom in. Holding down Option or Alt is going to zoom you out. Okay. Okay. And something I think that I also want to do, I'm going to zoom in here. I want to show you something again, and that is that I would like to make the concentric circle that's going to be a duplication inside of this. I would like to make it like 1 grid mark wide. And so the point of me saying that, it might be hard for you to see on the screen because the grid is so grayed out. So I'm going to zoom in closer. And this is the tangent on the right. So you've got 4 anchor points, curved anchor points for a circle, a perfect circle, top, bottom, left, and right. And essentially they're curved 25%. That is what gives you a perfect circle. Okay. And the thing that you need to do I guess I should say a tangent, first of all, is if you have a line. So I'm going to draw a grid or a guideline out. So this guide, for instance, it's a tangent to the circle because it only touches the circle in one place. You can't really necessarily tell because it has a stroke on it, and this is kind of going to be part of my point. And that is when a straight line intersects a circle or some other kind of curved line, it's going to hit it in multiple places unless it's hitting it on a tangent. The tangent is where a line can intersect a curve in one spot only, and that's where we get these anchor points, right? And so you see here, it's kind of hard to ascertain exactly where the point is if you're not really zoomed really far in. So because I'm not using this stroke for art purposes, I'm really just using it right now just for simple drawing purposes, and then I might get rid of it later, or I might make it bigger, I don't know. But for the sake of making my grid perfect, I want to be able to see it more clearly. So I'm going to select the circle, and you see here, you can see it more clearly here that it is only intersecting in one spot on the tangent, right? I could keep zooming in, but I'm not going to. But what I am going to do, just to make it really simple for me to see at a glance pretty quickly, is with that circle selected, I am going to go over here and change my stroke so that it is not 0.25, but it is 0.1. I think that I actually like that better. And you can see it's a lot easier to tell like where your tangents actually are, your anchor points actually are. All right, so, and I don't need this guide mark, so I'm just going to select it and delete it. Now, what I would like to do though is, and this is part of why I have a grid with subdivisions, is it helps me be able to make something that snaps perfectly so that everything is going to be aligned whenever I duplicate things. And I want to use I'll draw another guideline out. You can see here that this is 1 subdivision wide from the corner anchor point. You might go, okay, what about over here? Well, that's because it would be on its tangent at a different angle, but it's easy when we're doing something that's 90 degrees, so it's perfectly vertical and perfectly horizontal. I can use the left anchor point or the right anchor point or the top anchor point or the bottom anchor point when it hasn't been rotated. And then that way I can clearly see what the thickness of, or the distance is between these two lines that I'm going to draw. So I'm going to undo my guide mark. And you'll see here, I'm going to zoom out just a tiny, tiny bit. And I'm going to move this over so that we can see this a little bit better. And I'm going to select my circle, okay? And then I'm going to go grab the scale tool, and you can do that with the S key. It's right here in the toolbar though. And if it's not showing, if you like to go to the toolbar to pick your stuff instead of using shortcuts, you can click and hold. And maybe the rotate tool was showing, or reflect or something. But if it has a little, arrow down here, it's got other tools underneath it. But you'll notice that you have shortcuts here that will help you remember whenever you select stuff. So if you want to use scale, you can choose S. All right. And a lot of times I will go to the toolbar to grab stuff, because that way for the demo, you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm going to click on the circle. You can see my cursor here. And click on the circle, click and hold, and then Option Shift. And then as I start to drag it in, it kind of like is struggling. It wants to do something else, like it's trying to figure out where to go. Anyway, I'm going to choose to draw it so that it is one grid line thick. So, and you might look over here and go, well, I can't really tell how thick that is. That's why I was telling you to look at the top, left, bottom, or right. And you can see over here on the right, if I zoom in, you can see that it is one thick. And you can also see, zoom out, you can see at the top and so on, okay? All right, now I've got these things drawn, and I'm going to take my selection tool, and I'm going to select both of these, and I'm going to group them. To group, you can do Command G, or on Windows, it's Control G. Another way to group is to go Object, and then find Group. It's not showing up here because I already grouped these objects, but I can ungroup them, right? So I'm going to just leave them grouped. And I'm going to close the color swatch. And then I also want to show you something else too. That is, I think, important. If you go over here to Layers, the Layers tab, you can open this up and you'll see a number of things in here. First of all, this is the group that we just made, right? And if I open that up, it's got the two ellipses in there. But you also notice that we've got some guides. And then you over here have these eyeballs, so I can turn them on and off. And you can see that that was the one that I was using to show the tangent. I'm going to get rid of that. I don't need that. I can select it here on the screen, and I can hit the delete key. Another thing I can do, and it went away over here in the layers, another thing I could do is I can select something over here by using this little circular button off to the right. That will actually select something on the screen. You'll see here that that selects this interior circle, and then this is the exterior circle. Now, I would name these, but I'm not going to bother because there's other stuff I'm going to do with this. Normally, though, if something I intend to keep as is, I would definitely give it some sort of name so that it's easy for me to see it whenever I'm looking in my layers. You can also always expand this out to see what the names of the layers and their subcomponents are, what the objects are. That's what they're referred to as objects. Now, for right now, though, I'm just going to leave that as is. I'm going to pull that back in. I'll show a little bit of the ellipse. Now, if I wanted to ungroup something, the other thing that I could do is I could select both of these elements in the layer panel, and I could just click them and I can drag them right outside of the group. And now they're no longer in a group, right? So now I can select them individually. They don't get selected in a group. But if I wanted to group both of those, I could either click and drag them, selecting them, or click and drag across them, and that would select both of them, or I could select them by clicking one thing and then holding Shift and clicking the next. And you'll see that they're also in the layer panel over here. You'll see that they've got the circle showing. Another way, though, sometimes if you've got tons and tons of artwork on there, you can imagine that dragging across could be problematic. You might accidentally move something else or select too many things. And sometimes it's hard to identify what exactly it is that you're clicking. So that's something that's kind of nice about this panel over here, is that you can choose something by clicking it here. It selects it on the screen for you. And then you can also hold down Shift and click multiple things. And sometimes that's also just handy to be able to use that selection tool just so that you can identify where things are on the screen. So now that I've got these selected, I'm going to go ahead and group them again, Command G. Okay. And the other thing about these guides is that I don't necessarily want them in this layer. It's not going to hurt anything if they stay there. But if I want to keep things really clean, I would probably want to put the guides in a separate layer. So if you come down here to the bottom, there's a little plus symbol next to the trash can. Click on the little plus symbol, and that's going to give me a new layer. And then if I take both of these guides in my layer panel and I drag them into layer 2, I'll give that a new name. I'll call it guides. And now what we have is a guides layer that I can turn the visibility on and off. Right now we can't see the guides because I'm zoomed in so much, but and I can also lock the guides easily that way without actually having to go up here to lock all guides. So this is kind of a handy thing. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and go back to using my group over here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom out just a hair. I'm going to duplicate this, and I want this to be so that each of these are overlapping in like a quarter quadrant of the other circle. So for instance, if this is the center of this circle, I would want this point right here. Let's actually choose the group again. This bottom corner of the existing group, I want that to be the circle of the new group. So to do that, I can, with my black arrow tool, I'm going to click and hold it, and then hold down Option Shift, and then that's going to allow me to constrain my 45-degree angle and also duplicate it at the same time. And then I can drop this here. And you'll notice, because I have Snap to Grid on, it automatically registers really nicely. And if you wanted to just double check it, you can zoom in and make sure that it is in fact registered properly. Okay, so I like having these two as a starting place. Now I can select both of them, and I'm going to duplicate them again. So I'm creating this interesting overlapping set of shapes. And here, I'm not going to overlap it right here. I'm just going to have them overlapping kind of on the top and bottom. So it'll do something a little bit interesting in a moment, I think. So let's just keep doing that. In fact, what we can do now that we've got the spacing exactly the way we want, if you copy something, like by doing the Option drag, and you get the spacing exactly the way you want when you do it, you can just do Command D or Control D for duplicate, and then it will duplicate that with the exact same spacing as many times as you want it to, which is quite wonderful. All right, and so I went off into the pasteboard and I did a little bit further. So what I can do now is I can select all of this with my selection tool, and because I actually want these to kind of go off the edge here, and if I wanted to use my artboard like as kind of a cropping tool, right, I can click these and I can drag them holding Shift to constrain them, and like that I can start it in that regard, in that way. And so now I've got a little bit off the edge on both sides, which is kind of wonderful. Now, while I've got these selected, what I can do is I can click and hold Option Shift and drag these down until they snap into the spot that I want them. And they are not actually snapping, so hold on, let's undo that. Something is askew here because it's not actually snapping exactly the way I wanted it to. So let me zoom back out. Let's just try maybe not zooming out quite so far. And let's try it one more time. Oh, sorry. And yeah, something's not quite right. There. Well, okay. So that didn't work exactly the way I was hoping it would, but I was able to align it with my nudge keys. But because I had to align it with my nudge keys, I can't just do the duplication, because if I do, it ends up messing it up. So I'm going to undo that. It doesn't put it in the right spot. So while I've got that selected, I can do a similar thing. It's okay as long as I make sure that they stay aligned. I'll do my Option drag again and make sure that this snaps to where I want it to go. And I'm going to zoom in to see if it did, and it did not. I'm not sure why it's not doing it. Makes me wonder if something's off somewhere. Yeah, it's not. Okay, well, no matter. I'm getting it to work. So with the nudge keys, and that's fine. And I'll just keep doing that. Option drag. It just keeps doing the same old thing over and over. There we go. Let me make sure that this is aligned up here. It is. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure why that's happening, but It doesn't matter. It's working. So, oops. And the other thing too that I want to do is I can go all the way off the edge. I would like for this to go off the edge too. I'm probably okay just sticking with what I've got here, but I think I'm just going to, I think I'm just going to duplicate this group here, this set. Oh, keep picking the wrong thing here. This set, and I'm going to drag that down. So we'll do the option drag. And that seemed to be just fine. Okay. And then I can just double check all of my alignments, and they look like they're all meeting properly in the right spots. And I'm just doing a spot check, and we're good. Okay, so now I've got something that I can work with, and I don't have something that's going off the edges at the top. I'm probably not going to, well, you know, it's probably better now to do it than not. So let's just go ahead and make sure that we've got these coming off the edges in the top as well. Let me see if there were any off the edge. Yeah, there's this one. And I'm going to option drag that up. And it's snapping. And then I'm going to do that at the bottom as well. And then that way I've got something that nicely goes off the edge so that if I want to put a clipping mask off of it or crop it or export it out or something like that, I could do that. It gives me options basically. And this is the last option drag there. I'll double check it and it seemed to be fine. It snapped right in place. Okay. And see, now that allows us with this perfect grid that if we wanted to make this into a swatch or something like that, that it would be a repeating pattern, no problem. Okay, so now we've got this foundation created, and if you wanted to just really quickly turn off your guides, you could see, not guides, sorry, your grid, you could hide the grid, and you can see that we've got this beginning of something that could be a nice pattern. And I don't know what happened with the guide. This guide got off. I think it was supposed to be in the center there. Or I just had an extra one maybe. Here, just get rid of that. Okay. And so this is the foundation. And from this point, we could do a number of things. We could turn this into live paint and start filling in the empty spots, including these gaps if you wanted. One of the things that I think that I would like to do is I'm going to make a copy of this. So I'm going to do a select all with a Command A or Control A. And I'm going to group this with a Command G or Control G. And I'm going to make a copy of this just out here, pasteboard. So we'll do an option drag and get it way over here just so that we have an original in case we want to come back to that. And then we can just work with what we've got here. All right, now you'll see if you go over here in the guides, you'll see that you've got, or excuse me, not the guides, the layers. You'll see that, oh, I ended up working inside of the guides layer. Oh, well, not a big deal. I can easily take these groups and I can put them down inside of this layer. I'm going to lock that guides layer so that that doesn't happen again. And I can always just turn the visibility on and off if I don't want those turned on. Oh, you know what? I'm just fouling the whole thing up here. I have the guides as part of my group. It's because I didn't lock my layer. Lesson learned. Even I do this kind of stupid stuff. So I'm going to take these guides. I'm going to stick them up here. Oops, it's locked. I'm going to stick them up inside of guides. And because I have two groups, I can put these also up there. Okay. And now if I lock the guides, I turn them off. Now I don't have to look at those guides. And because it's locked, I can't accidentally start working inside that layer. Okay, so I've got two groups and they're both in one layer. So it's up to you if you want to create extra layers. I like to keep my layers kind of straightforward. So I'm going to take the active group, which is this bottom one you can tell because it has the circle over here highlighted. I'm going to take that group. I'm going to put it up here in what's called layer 3. And I'm going to rename layer 1 that's, you see it's the one that's off to the side. I'm going to rename that. I'm going to call it, let's just call it backup original. And we'll lock it. And we could hide it if we wanted to, but I'm going to leave it visible so we don't forget about it. And then for layer 3, we'll just call this foundation. Okay. Or something. You call it whatever you want. Okay. So that's a good stopping place. And then in the next one, I'll show you a little bit like about how to do live paint and how to blend objects and things like that.